Hi, everybody, and welcome to this special induction ceremony of Ernest Tucker into the CBC News Hall of Fame. My name is Brian Daly. I'm a producer at CBC here in Halifax, and Ernest was my journalism instructor, so a very special day indeed.
And I'm Tashana Reed, a senior reporter for CBC News in Toronto. I would like to add that Brent Banbury is not able to be with us today. Brent worked with Ernest, and that made a profound impact on him. Now, over the course of today's ceremony, Brian and I will talk about the important role that Ernest Tucker played in the lives of hundreds of journalists. We will hear from Susan Margetti, General Manager of CBC News, Current Affairs, and Local.
And we'll also hear from Barb Williams, who's CBC's Executive Vice President of English Services, who will also unveil a plaque to Ernest. And we're also happy that watching today are Ernest's three children, Jasmine, Julien, and Rebecca. Rebecca later on, by the way, is going to speak on behalf of the family. We'd also like to welcome all of Ernest Tucker's family and friends who are watching today, and a special thank you to Joyce DeShields, who we're told has invited like half of Bermuda to join us today.
So I'm speaking to you from the newsroom of the CBC Broadcast Center in Toronto, and I'm just in a little pocket here. Our show's actually live on the air, but just outside this newsroom, you will find the CBC News Hall of Fame where the ceremony normally takes place. Now, the Hall of Fame was established in 2014 following the death of anchor and correspondent Knowlton Nash. After Knowlton Nash, we honored foreign correspondent Joe Schlesinger, and Joe was followed by Barbara Frum and then by Trina McQueen. And last year, we welcomed pioneering war correspondents Matthew Halton and Peter Stursberg into the hall. Every year, we survey our staff to nominate individuals who have actively mentored talent, pushed the envelope as innovators, and served as role models. I think that perfectly sums up our previous 6 inductees, as well as Ernest Tucker, the 2020 inductee to the CBC News Hall of Fame.
Right. And Ernie, we call him Ernie. He was such a special man to us. I got to take you back to the early 90s in Montreal at John Abbott College, where Ernie was an instructor for 36 years, as well as being a broadcaster, radio broadcaster for the CBC. And he was my first journalism instructor. He's the one who got me into Ryerson. He's the one who wrote the recommendation letter that really started my 25-year career in this business. And it's just like Ernie, giving, selfless, and always looking to help other people, not focusing attention on himself. Sometimes in broadcasting, people can get focused on their own performance, their own accomplishments, all those sorts of things. Ernest was a man of many accomplishments, but when we were students of his, he was focused on teaching us the nuts and bolts of journalism and doing it with style, doing it in such a selfless way, in such a laid back way. Ernie was a quiet man. He was very measured in his tone and the way that he taught us how to write leads, taught us about the active voice in broadcasting and making it punchy, gently telling us that our stand-up was shot upside down or without the proper lighting and all the other sorts of things. Didn't ever make you feel as though you were a failure, whether you were or not. He found a way, understanding that we were young people, just testing things out at that community college in suburban Montreal. And so he understood that all the way through. And for me personally, aside from learning from Ernie, in terms of journalism skills, it was some of those quiet moments in his office or after class or before class. I was eager. I was one of the classes I was eager to get to because it wasn't math. There were no numbers involved. I wasn't into that. I was into journalism. So he would take me aside and, gently give me extra little bits of advice. And I did get the sense that, given that he was also from the islands, which is where my heritage is from, that there was that special connection. And Ernie would tell me a little bit here and there about how things were in the past. But, considering that he had difficulty breaking into the business, it wasn't something that was prominent in the way that he dealt with us. He didn't bring it up a lot, certainly wasn't bitter, always positive, always focused on making sure that we learned what we needed to learn to build that foundation. I can only think of one instance in which he even mentioned some of the racism that he faced in the 50s and 60s when in his early days in Canada. There was one time when he just sort of, almost as an aside, mentioned that he had to go back to Bermuda at one point early in his career because, as he put it, they weren't hiring blacks at that time. And that was it. He wasn't one of those people who was going to belabor the point or sort of make grievance the center of his message. Instead, optimism was the center of his message. Developing young people was the center of his message. And when I think about, I could just name off, a national reporter for a Canadian news network was one of his students who also was with me. A one-time bureau chief for a radio network in Ottawa, so a parliamentary bureau chief. That was one of the people who was in our class. Somebody who is currently a top director at the School for Public Service in Ottawa was also one of our classmates, and so on and so on. So a lot of young journalists from the early 90s went on, and we loved journalism, and we're still in communications or journalism in some way, shape, or form because of that foundation that Ernie laid out for us. So now I want to give you an idea of Ernest Tucker's accomplishments. The things he wouldn't boast about, the things he didn't want people to focus on, are the very things that we're focusing on today, which is the tremendous career of Ernest Tucker. And we've got a slideshow for you that lays out Ernest Tucker's tremendous career. Here's a look at it right now.
Wow, that was really lovely. Thank you, Brian. Now, I'm sad to say that it was after Ernest Tucker died in January of 2019 that I first learned his name. Unlike Brian, I didn't have a personal connection with him. I never met him. I read a CBC.ca story with the headline, A Life of Firsts, Ernest Tucker, trailblazing Montreal journalist, dead at 87. But what struck me at that time was why so many of us weren't familiar with his story. A story that begins in Warwick, Bermuda in 1931. Tucker was one of 7 children born to parents Benjamin and Eleanor. He was raised in a family of teachers, and at the age of 14, Ernest would arrive in Canada with his older brother, who was on a teaching scholarship to study. He would then apply to Ryerson's Institute of Technology and study journalism, going on to become the first Black graduate of the program in 1954. But after graduation, he would soon find out that the opportunities for a young Black journalist were limited. One of Tucker's experiences with racism in Canada was after applying for a job in Sudbury, Ontario. He was hired over the phone for a reporting job and took a long bus ride to Sudbury to meet his employer. In an interview, Tucker recounted, quote, "As soon as I stepped off the bus, the boss took one look at me. He said my job had suddenly been taken. He didn't realize I was Black. Everyone in my class found work that year except me." During his continuing studies at McGill University, when he applied for a writing position on the campus paper, he was told he would have to deliver papers around campus first. This was the reality, but Tucker continued to write. He continued to push past the barriers before him. In the 50s, he found writing and editing jobs in Montreal, Toronto, and returned to Bermuda to work for the Bermuda Recorder, where his talented writing got him noticed and a job offer came through. He made his way back to Canada to write at the Toronto Telegram. He also edited the West Indian Reporter, Toronto's first Black newspaper. And then he landed a radio gig at the CBC in 1961, where many career highlights would follow. Most famously, Tucker's role on November 22, 1963, when he would break the news of U.S. President John F. Kennedy being shot. The story goes that everyone had gone for lunch and Tucker was alone in the newsroom. The teletype machines were going crazy and Tucker's instincts kicked in. He consulted his CBC book, wrote the copy, and found a news announcer to read the news on air. He was at first reprimanded for not going along with the CBC protocol, but Tucker said, quote, "The next day, when the papers praised the CBC for its coverage, I was given a promotion." Tucker would go on to produce the National Radio Show across Canada, working alongside hosts Alex Trebek and Lloyd Robertson. And he interviewed many greats, from Nat King Cole, Josephine Baker, and boxer Joe Louis. He was the first person to speak to the Beatles when they performed in Montreal in 1964. And remember the Bed-In for Peace in Montreal in 1969? Tucker was there with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And he covered historical events from the civil rights movement in the 1960s to the FLQ crisis. He authored 3 books and mentored many of our favorite journalists and voices, all while raising a family with his wife, Jeanette. His talent was abundantly clear in decades of TV and radio stories, and he took up teaching at John Abbott College while continuing to work at CBC in Montreal. Many of you wrote about his 36 years at John Abbott College as a media professor, where he taught decades of journalists. Tucker wanted to give the next generation the tools to be their best at their craft. And after retiring from the CBC in the mid-90s, he would continue to teach until 2008. He's the first Black journalist to graduate from Ryerson University's journalism program, and the first Black journalist hired to work here at the CBC. Tucker opened many doors, and he held the door open for those who came after him. His story serves as inspiration. I can't help but see my story in his. I too came to Canada as an immigrant. I too graduated from Ryerson University's journalism program, and here I am at CBC News. Many other Black journalists, immigrants, people of color can see their story in his, and we stand on the shoulders of Ernest Tucker and so many others. I only wish I had an opportunity to have met him to say thank you in person. So today, I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Tucker. And now I would like to introduce Susan Margetti, General Manager of CBC News, Current Affairs and Local.
Thank you, Tashana, and thank you, Brian. And Rebecca, I didn't know your dad, but I just want to say congratulations to you and your family, and to thank him for all that he has done for CBC and for journalism. I didn't know him professionally, but I know his work, I know his stories, and I didn't know him personally. Although from just hearing Tashana and Brian, I feel like I know a little bit about who he was. I know he wrote books. In novels, they say that a character is defined by what they say, what they do, and what others say about them. And if that is the definition, at least in writing, of a character, then Ernie had real character. His legacy, I believe, it's a lasting one, and I hope you know that. And it's an honor to honor him today, and it's not just for his journalism, which of course it is, but it's also for all of those things you've heard. It's that incredible gift that he has given to others, the help, the support, the mentoring. And I loved, we heard from so many employees who nominated Ernie, and I loved what they said. They said Ernie was a true trailblazer. Someone said the greatest mentor. Several people said, I can only imagine what he had to endure as the first Black journalist at CBC. So, for all of that and more, as I say, it's an honor to honor him today. In a moment, we are going to hear from Barb Williams. Barb is, of course, our Executive Vice President of English Services. But if we could, just for a moment, if you're like Tashana and you think, well, I don't really know Ernie's work, you need to. So we would like to play for you just a sample of Ernie's tremendous legacy. And so this is Ernest Tucker reporting. It's June 1970. He was a reporter in the Toronto newsroom, and he spoke to a number of Black war resistors who were talking about their experience in Canada, in Toronto. They came here to escape the draft in the United States. And this is Ernest Tucker.
The Underground Railroad, once the freedom route to Canada for runaway slaves, now a gathering place for Black draft dodgers in Toronto. In these rooms that tell the stories of Black leaders, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Martin Luther King, they eat their own kind of food and listen to music of the soul. There are about 300 Black draft dodgers, or Black war resistors as they prefer to be called, living in Toronto. There's an even greater number in Vancouver and less in Montreal. Others are scattered across the country wherever they can find employment. Those in the city have found rooms or apartments in Black neighborhoods. They keep close contact with each other and usually get together on weekends. Most of these Black war resistors knew very little about Canada before crossing the border. They knew there were anti-draft organizations here, but there is little or no information about them in Black American communities. So they place long-distance calls, usually to Montreal, and are advised to head for Toronto, where there is a larger Black community and no language problem. Upon arrival here, they soon learn that there are other problems.
The first problem that Black war resistors come in contact with is the lack or the apparent lack of a real Black community here in Toronto. When I say Black community, I mean Black community in terms of a high concentration of Black people, whereas most of the brothers who come from the States have lived in this kind of area or have always lived in this kind of area and have grown up in this kind of area. And when they come to Toronto, this Black community is very, very difficult to find. So they feel an isolation. In other words, they feel a cultural type of shock.
I plan to become a Canadian citizen. I think that citizenship is a 19th century hangover anyhow, but it helps to have somebody's passport, and I might as well have Canada's as anybody else's. And I think that Canada is a reasonably sane country, which is not to say that it's a perfect country, but it's reasonably sane, as opposed to a lot of other countries I can name that are quite insane.
If you have something to offer here, you can do it in Canada, whereas in America, you might have a little problems. America's a lot different In my particular field, for instance, I have managed to get more work in Canada than I've had in the last 12 years living in America.
But Canada is a very racist type of country. You can see this in housing, you can see it in jobs, you can see it in almost every contact that a black person has with this society. He finds racism and discrimination and prejudice.
Would you advise other black war resistors to come to Canada?
No, I wouldn't. I would say to other black brothers who are considering coming up to Canada to, if at all possible, find every reasonable or every means to stay in the United States, whether that means legal or illegal means, to avoid the draft. But I would say because of the cultural shock of Canada, because of the isolation, a brother has a very difficult time in surviving mentally and surviving physically in Canada.
I think basically I'd also like to go to some of the third world nations to live and work there a while. But Canada is like a beautiful country. A lot of beautiful people in it.
Although most black war resistors are reluctant to appear on television to discuss their problems, they're not reluctant in taking a very active role in black Canadian communities. This is Ernest Tucker, CBC News, Toronto.
His career was so impactful, and it was so worthy of this celebration today. And I have this very distinct honor of helping us all pretend for a moment we're on the 4th floor of the CBC building in that wonderful space where we have honored journalists of the past and where we are going to honor Ernest Tucker today with this plaque. But I have a version of it right here. So with a little drum roll in your heads, let me please unveil our plaque. And it's beautiful. And this is a copy of what will be on the 4th floor. And I know none of you can read those words on your screen today, so let me read them for you. Ernest Tucker didn't set out to change the face of journalism in Canada, but in his own quiet but determined way, he did. Born in Bermuda in 1931, Tucker came to Canada at the age of 14. Looking to get into journalism, Tucker experienced the racism all too familiar to people of color. But he persevered and broke the color barrier as a reporter and newsroom leader at CBC Montreal and Toronto, and as a beloved instructor for over 3 decades at John Abbott College outside Montreal. Like many great journalists, Tucker covered the events: the John F. Kennedy assassination, the civil rights movement, the FLQ crisis, and the people who changed the world: Black Power activist Stokely Carmichael, boxer Joe Louis, musicians Josephine Baker and Louis Armstrong. But what Ernest Tucker may not have realized is that he also changed the lives of thousands of students and colleagues who knew him, and of countless others who continue to benefit from his legacy. And then at the bottom, underneath his picture, is a quote of his that says, "I never let race get in the way of what I wanted." And so clear that that was the words he lived by. And so now I'd like to introduce you to and pass this over to one of Tucker's children, who's here today to speak on behalf of her family. And I have to say, I've had the ability to see your face, Rebecca, while the videos were playing, and you can see the pride, which I feel for you and your whole family on this day today. And I'm so happy we're able to provide this opportunity to celebrate your dad. Please let me introduce Rebecca Severin.
Thank you, Barb. Wow. Well, my father, always the journalist, talked about the importance of a very strong opening line. And this is my one. It's thank you. On behalf of Jasmine and Julian, my brother and sister who are watching at home, I also want to acknowledge Michael and Krista, my 2 siblings who passed away. And I'd also want to give a shout out to friends and relatives from across the country who are watching right now. England, US, Netherlands, especially half of Bermuda. And they say thank you. Thank you on their behalf. Well, when I got the call about the Hall of Fame, I thought my father was only nominated. And I thought, that's wonderful. He's nominated, but he's probably not going to win because we never win anything. And they said, I said, this is going to be the last I'm ever going to hear of it. And then after that, they said, you heard me wrong. Your father won. He won by a landslide. And I just freaked out. And I just held the phone in my hand and I started crying like a baby because I was so overwhelmed. I'm not a journalist, and I had to keep this a secret for 2 months until it was officially announced. And I don't know how you journalists keep your mouth shut. I can't keep a secret. I'm a big gossip, and it was killing me to keep my mouth shut and not tell anybody. I'd be on the bus thinking, I got a secret. And but I kept my mouth shut, and it killed me. So when it finally went public, first thing I did was I plastered it all over Facebook and Instagram. I called my relatives that weren't online, but my Facebook comments, I got so many of them, and it was like, your dad is so awesome. I wish I met him. You must be so proud of him. And I couldn't believe it. It was just too much. And then the morning man on Shom, that's the local radio station here, he announced on the air my father would be inducted into the CBC Hall of Fame. And he was also his teacher. So I was just blown away. And, you know, my father taught so many people, and all of them reached out to me. So it's been really hard to focus on things because everyone's saying congratulations for my dad. And of course, I'm taking it all. The irony of all of this was my father worked at the CBC. Then I get a call from the CBC saying they want to interview me all about my father. So of course I agreed to it. You know, it was a great experience. It was so much fun. 10 interviews, 3 hours. But I have to say to you journalists, it was a little frustrating to me because along with all the good memories, which I could bask in, I was asked over again about his bad experiences. And I'm sure he had some, but he was our father. And he wanted to protect us and not make us afraid of going out in the world. So he just told us about his hardships, but no bitterness. And he said that knowledge and perseverance were the key. He said some people were bad, but not everybody, and look for the good in people. My father was a good teacher. He didn't use his job as a platform to brag about himself and his past glories. He told us about the good, the bad, and what to expect out in the real world, and made sure the students had the tools to be prepared. And hobbies, my father did not have normal man hobbies. No fishing, no golf. His hobby was the news. So before the internet and the multi-screens, my dad was the king of the multitaskers. When he was home, he'd turn on the TV to the news, he'd turn on the radio to the news, and he'd have a newspaper in his hand all at the same time. And my mom, she was just so confused. She'd just go around, turning off the TV or the radio, whatever she was closest to. But I know she'd be so proud of him now for this huge honor. Unfortunately, my mother passed away 6 months to the day after my dad. And they were married for 61 years. So I wish she was able to see this too. My father's career spanned from the 60s to the 90s. Although he covered politics, music, celebrities, entertainers, he also covered race relations in Canada, like in the video clip we just saw a few minutes ago. My father, he would be really surprised and disappointed about what's going on in the US and here in Canada. My father always believed Black lives mattered, and he would be upset that this is still an issue now. You know, earlier you said my father was a trailblazer, and to me, that's who he was. An immigrant from Bermuda who broke barriers in this country and demonstrated what was possible. Before I go, I'm going to leave you with something, a little anecdote. I told you my father covered many stories of racial content. Like a good journalist, he never publicly spoke about politics. But I'm going to tell you about the time my father took my siblings and me to a Black Panther rally. For those of you who don't know the Black Panther Party, they were an American organization who challenged police brutality against African Americans. They were meeting in Montreal, and our father took us there. But you have to realize, Jasmine was 10, Krista was 9, I was 7, and Michael was 6. But it's not like what you think. Actually, it was 1970. My mom was in the hospital and about to give birth, and the CBC had an assignment for my dad. Get an interview with Stokely Carmichael, the head of the Black Panthers. Since there was no babysitter, my dad took us and piled us all into the car, drove to the auditorium, and he told us to stay quiet and left us in the hall while he went in to do the interview. I don't remember anything except being super bored and people coming out every 5 minutes going, be quiet, be quiet. And of course, when my mom heard the news, she had a fit, started screaming at him, Ernest! But that was my father. He put his work first, but he put his kids first also. So, on behalf of my brother Julian and my sister Jasmine, especially my mother and my father who made this all possible, I would like to thank the CBC for this huge honor. I can't wait for this stupid pandemic to be over so I can travel to Toronto, go to the CBC, and see my father's plaque on the wall. It's going to be great. So once again, on behalf of my family, thank you so much for this huge honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Jasmine and Julian. And it's just so heartfelt. I feel like I know Ernie that much more. And you mentioned that he was trying to protect you by not going into too much detail about all the things that had happened in the early days of his career. And I feel like he was protecting me and protecting some of us too, especially the Black students who he taught, because like I had mentioned earlier, Ernest kept it moving. He kept it positive. And he knew that we were all on the cusp of our careers and that, depending on how he framed the way the industry was, could have an effect on what direction we chose to go in. And so he focused on the positives. And he really, like I said, focused on us and focused on what we needed to learn and where we were in need of some guidance, and didn't get into so many, tangents about things that weren't really on point for what we needed to know as students. He would just give us little tidbits about his career, and all with the goal of not candy coating it, but yet making sure we understood this was an exciting career to be in. And it was exciting to be Ernie's student. He would always be sending us out. There weren't a lot of long lectures. He wanted us to get out there and get the stories, pound the pavement. And we spent so much time out in the streets around Montreal getting stories to bring back for editing. And I'll always treasure it. And I'll always treasure the impact that Ernie had on my career. And then I had the honor of working with him at the CBC in the first couple of years of my career in the CBC Montreal newsroom. So thanks again, Rebecca, Jasmine, and Julian. And a special thanks to everyone who put in their nominations for Ernest Tucker, for the CBC News Hall of Fame. Ernest had a huge number of nominations over the past 2 years and was able that he was inducted this year, and we were all honored to be here for this incredible occasion. And I hope that in the future, other diverse journalists from CBC's storied past and storied present are also going to get a chance to receive this great recognition.
And thanks again, Rebecca. That was a beautiful tribute for your father. Really enjoyed that. And I want to say special thanks to all the people who are working behind the scenes to make today possible. Today's ceremony would not have been so great if it had not been for the hard work of a number of people. And I just want to share special thanks to Laura McIsaac, who was in charge of technical management of this webcast. Brenda Carroll from our image library. We saw those beautiful still images, as well as Arthur Schwartzel, who was from Visual Resources to get some of that great archive material. Radio Archives, Keith Hart, CBC's Reference Library, Diana Redegeld, she helped out, graphic designer Stephanie Dudley, Malik Suleiman, and Audrey Nair, video editor Andrew Niblo, and thanks to Mark Mikowitz for overseeing this project and inviting us and bringing us all together. And to all of you who logged on from home or from work and joined us, I hope we can all walk away today feeling a sense of pride in Ernest Tucker's story and appreciate the many contributions he made to the CBC, but as well as Canadian journalism. So keep safe and thank you everyone, and happy holidays.